Greetings, everyone. Welcome to COS Indiana Live. I'm your host this evening. My name is Dale Parrish. I'm the virtual program coordinator. And with me tonight is my co-host, Mr. Ken Kashuba. Hello, Ken.
Hello, Dale. How are you?
Ken can barely hear you.
I said, hello, Dale. How are you?
There you go. That's getting better. That's getting better. Ken, as co-host, will be monitoring our chat section. So if you are a viewer viewing on our Facebook page, Convention of States Indiana, or our YouTube channel, Indiana Patriots for Convention of States, feel free to submit a question or a comment through the chat. And Ken, like I said, will be monitoring those and let us know if we have a comment or question that we need to address. So that's what Ken will be doing, as well as helping out with our guests and program tonight. Ken, tonight is broadcast number 235, and you have been on board for 99, Ken.
99.
You're gonna hit that 100 mark next week, aren't you?
That's Lord willing.
And the creek doesn't rise, or something like that. So,
that's right. Yep.
Well, good for you. That's great. Well, we'll get to 100 for Ken Kashuba as co-host of COS Indiana Live. That'll be great. Well, Ken, tell us. I know you got some information for us. You want to talk about that QR code, and I got stories to tell you about QR codes, but I won't take the time now. But really getting into this.
I could only imagine, Dale. I could only imagine.
We're really getting into this. My wife and I are. So anyway, and about our subscriber program. So Ken, why don't you enlighten us, please?
Okay, yeah, that QR code right there is a way to subscribe to COS Indiana Live. We are in full swing. We've picked up a couple of new subscribers last week, and the numbers are starting to grow. So if you scan that QR code with your smartphone, it'll ask you for your name and email address, and you'll get subscribed. We are also going to add in the chat tonight, we're going to add a link, which I think is going to go there right about now. And that link is for those that may have trouble with QR codes. I had one viewer last week said he couldn't use the QR code for some reason, his camera or whatever. So we've added the link. If you click on that, you'll see a little box that says join the community. All you have to do is click that join the community button and put in the same information, your name and email address, and you'll become a subscriber. And we have a number of new exciting resources there, from videos to interviews, as well as the PDFs and other types of information. And there's a full feed where you can interact with other subscribers. So you can get on there and you can give suggestions to Dale if you want. So it's a great way to get upcoming programming.
Constructive.
Yep.
Constructive suggestions, right? Yes. Okay. All right. Good. All right. I want to. I'm going to bring this on every week and just make everyone aware of this. If you don't already do this, I encourage you to Google the U.S. Debt Clock, usdebtclock.org, and look at this from time to time. It's just jam-packed with information. But of course, what we're really focused on here up in the left-hand corner is the total debt, national debt. As you can see, we're at $34.5 trillion. Gary Harbaugh is going to come on later on our broadcast this evening and introduce a new series that we're starting called Debt Avalanche. And we're going to be talking about the U.S. debt. This is addressing the debt is one of the pillars of the Convention of States resolution, calling for a Convention of States. One of the things that we want to see addressed via a Convention of States. So We're gonna be touching on this because quite honestly, I personally believe this is the number one issue in our country, but it just doesn't get the attention that I think it deserves. So we're going to give it a lot of attention on COS Indiana Live. So I just wanted to bring that up. Like I said, Gary will be coming on later, and we'll be introducing a new series where we're going to address this particular issue. Okay. All right. Well, let's get started. Tonight, our main guest is Mr. Paul Phillips. Paul is our a national legislative associate, and I'm going to bring Paul on right now and say hi to Paul. Hello, Paul.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah, good, good. I thought we'd lost you there. Okay. Well, good to see you, Paul. As I mentioned, you're what I refer to as a national legislative associate. Paul, Paul Phillips started in Convention of States here in Indiana. Still lives here in Indiana. He's come up through the ranks of COS Indiana, and then decided that he wanted to take a position in our national group. So, how long you been in this job, Paul? Now, year or two?
The current one, about a year and a half.
Year and a half. Okay. All right. So anyway, Paul is going to talk to us tonight about what we call the state of the states, not the state of the union, but we've already heard a speech on that. But the state of the states. And Paul, to kind of set the stage here for those viewers that are not part of Convention of States, kind of give us an idea of what we're talking about here, what we're trying to accomplish, and kind of a thumbnail sketch, if you could, please.
Sure. Well, as most of you may know, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, a grassroots organization, and we're working to amend the U.S. Constitution. And to do that, we're using Article 5 of the Constitution, which one of the ways amendments can be proposed is if we would get 2/3 of the states, that's 34 states, to apply for a convention, Congress would have to call the convention, naming the time and the place. And then, even though it's 34 states to call the convention, all 50 would participate. And they would each send a delegation of commissioners. Those commissioners would go through a legislative process, and anything that would pass a majority vote, that's within the parameters of the call, I'll mention that in a second, would be a proposal, nothing more than a suggestion. And then those would get submitted back to the states, and it would take 3/4 or 38 states to ratify. And once a proposal is ratified by 3/4 of the states, it becomes part of the Constitution.
So the ratification process is the same, even if the proposed amendment had come out of Congress.
Yes.
The ratification process is the same. All Article 5 presents to us, I should say, is the alternative of holding a convention to propose amendments.
Correct. It's actually a way to get around Congress. So, as most people know, Congress can propose an amendments with a supermajority 2/3 vote in each house, and then the amendment would go out to proposal would go out to the states for ratification. But we can hold this convention, and the states can propose amendments, and that's very important for a Congress that's got out of control, because who would rationally expect them to control themselves, to relinquish power that they've already taken? So right. The way to do that is through the states, and our application limits the amendments that can be proposed to anything to do with fiscal constraints, like a balanced budget amendment or taxing limits, term limits on not just Congress, but federal officials, Supreme Court, that's all in bounds. and then limiting the power, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government. So telling the federal government there are some things it can't do anymore, like education is an example. We believe education should be done at the state level, and there's no need for the federal government to be involved.
Okay. So that's what we're trying. That's what we're trying to work toward, is to get 34 states on board with the resolution calling for a convention of states. All right.
Correct.
All right. So now let's tell everybody, Paul, how do we stand through? I know this is an ongoing process, but through the end of 2023, where did we stand toward the goal of 34 states?
So we have 19 states which have passed our application, and technically 20 if you count Kansas, and that's actually being litigated right now. Without going into too much detail, Kansas has a provision in their state constitution which says you need 2/3 of each house to vote for an Article 5 application for it to pass. That's actually unconstitutional because the Constitution does not introduce that limit. And because of the supremacy clause, the state constitution can't override the U.S. Constitution. So there are some legislators in Kansas who've initiated a lawsuit to get confirmation that Kansas is actually state number 20. Not sure when that will happen, but hope it does soon. So we've also been have our resolution introduced in 19 additional states this year. We've had so far 3 committee wins where application has been heard in committee and passed out of committee in Idaho, Iowa, and Massachusetts. So we're very excited about that. However, we've also had 3 states where our application has died. So that's South Dakota, Wyoming, and New Mexico. So we'll have to go back again and pick those up next year.
Oh, okay.
So
But
I see you had our top 3 states up there in your Chiron. I can talk about those. Besides the ones I've just talked about, Idaho and Iowa, we're waiting for a floor vote, but things have kind of stalled there. Massachusetts, we're waiting for a floor vote too, but chances of that are unlikely at this point, we believe. But some other states with activity, North Carolina has already passed in the House, if I remember right, and we're waiting to pass in the Senate. We just need to get the application introduced. That could easily be state number 20 or 21, depending on when the Kansas legislation settles. Ohio and Pennsylvania are also very active states right now. So that's where we've got the most activity with that passing our application.
Paul, let's back up here just a minute. You said it's been the resolution has been introduced in 19 states so far in 2024, right?
Yes.
Kind of give the viewer a little idea of some of the hurdles or the process of how the resolution gets to the point of being voted upon.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, we need to find a sponsor, somebody willing to carry the legislation. Once we do that, it's introduced. So obviously in 19 states, we've found a sponsor or sponsors to carry the legislation. Once introduced, the legislation is read in the full chamber and assigned to a committee. And once it gets into committee, we need the committee chairperson to actually schedule a hearing on the bill. That doesn't always happen. Oftentimes, resolutions and bills die in committee because they're simply not introduced. So that's kind of where we're at. We've had 3 committee hearings. After a committee hearing, If the bill passes out of committee, then it would go to the floor for a full vote in that chamber, the House or the Senate. And it depends on the legislature. They all do it a little differently. Some will introduce one bill that goes in sequence. It passes through one house, then it goes to the other house, same process, assigned to a committee, passes there, and then passes the full house. Some states do it in parallel, where they introduce the application in the House and the Senate at the same time, and those two pieces of legislation move independently. And then ultimately, when both pass, there might have to be a conference committee to iron out differences. But that in general is the process for passing resolutions or legislation.
And this process is so it's just so open to being shot down very easily. I mean, one person can make in the right place could make the difference on whether this continues on, right?
We learn that lesson year after year after year. It just takes one person in the right place, say a committee chairperson who doesn't want to hear our legislation, or a majority leader in one of the houses who doesn't want to bring it to the House floor for a vote if it does get out of committee. And so, yeah, it's can be a very difficult process if there's a person in the right place who doesn't support our legislation.
Because I know in some states, am I right, that the resolution has been filed, it's been introduced, it's been in the works for some years now.
Yes. Idaho's probably a good example. We made history this year getting it heard in a committee and passing out of committee. It's been a long uphill battle there. And that's fine. We're persistent. We keep coming back every year, and we just keep chipping away at the legislature and trying to build relationships, and we'll eventually get there. We're not going to give up.
I know we have some celebrities from time to time testify in front of these committees, right?
By celebrities, you're not. Who are you talking about? I mean, we're not.
Have you testified?
Anybody who was on the Academy Awards last night, but celebrities in our COS universe would be people like Mark Meckler, Rick Santorum, and Michael Ferris, for example.
That's who I was.
Those are three big hitters.
Have you testified?
No, I have not.
No. Oh, okay. All right.
I'm more behind the scenes. I'm not up front in the legislature. Kind of
All right.
Although my associate Rita Peters, our senior vice president for legislative affairs, has testified as well. All four of them are very capable.
Maybe your daughter Maya someday will testify of convention of states.
Maybe.
She's studying to be a constitutional lawyer. So anyway, but okay. So the process is it's a very difficult process, to say the least, and it was I guess it was intended to be that way,
right?
But it is a very difficult process and very open to being halted. Like we said, one person could actually do it. So once again, now of the ones that have been filed this year, we're kind of looking at as the top three: North Carolina, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, right?
These top three that haven't been heard in committee yet.
Okay.
North Carolina's been in committee. It just needs to get called in the Senate. But Ohio and Pennsylvania, they're in the early stages of hearing those.
Okay.
Paul, we have a viewer question coming up if you want.
Okay. Go ahead, Ken.
Now, Dale, stop taking me out of there.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to hide.
Is there anyone to circumvent someone who stalls a bill by refusing to bring it up?
There are a number of things that we can do when there's somebody who's opposed to us and we need to get through them. We can have some people meet with them, some private meetings. We can have constituents call them. We have some sophisticated software where we can send out an email request to our petition signers and ask them to call and email a specific legislator, so we can bring to bear that kind of pressure. If we've got some influential fundraisers in the state, we can often ask them to contact the legislator to give them a little bit of a push. And finally, if none of that stuff works, we can always campaign against them. And in fact, in South Carolina, last week's election, we were involved in 16 state House and Senate elections, and we won 15 of them. So supporting COS candidates. So those are some of the things that we can do.
So sometimes it's a matter of getting the right person in the right position, then.
Yes.
To help us along the way. Okay. All right. Good. All right. Well, Paul, I wanted you to also talk about some other legislation, or how COS is supporting other types of legislation. And the F3 theory is very popular here in Convention of States. So you want to talk about F3?
Yeah, F3 legislation is a program primarily we're using in past states like Indiana. So the state has passed our application, but that doesn't mean that you're done or it's time to go to sleep. So what we try to do in terms of continuing to build our grassroots, continuing to build our skills in working with the legislature, is our state teams can select legislation that they want to support and are using Convention of States resources. And our criteria is this legislation has to have something to do with federalism, freedom, or fundamental rights. And we have a process for them to submit a proposal, and it gets reviewed by our executive committee, and the executive committee approves it. We can unleash all of our resources to help get that legislation passed. As I said, it's a great way to exercise our political muscle. It builds the reputation of Convention of States, and it helps us build legislator relationships in the state that we're going to need later on down the line, particularly when it comes to ratification. So our state teams in places like Georgia, Kansas, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, Wisconsin are all actively working legislation this session. A lot of these bills cover issues like parental rights, limiting taxes, election activity, prohibiting transgender procedures on children, keeping men out of women's sports, a lot of those hot issues. And what's very exciting, a more recent development over the last couple of years, is we've developed excellent relationships with Alliance Defending Freedom and the Heritage Foundation. And both of those organizations are great policy organizations, and they have some model legislation in a number of the areas I mentioned. And what do we bring to the table? It's a very powerful, engaged grassroots. So Rita Peters, my colleague, our Vice President for Legislative Affairs, works with those organizations to come up with a list of their legislation that we want to move. And we get our grassroots teams engaged on that kind of stuff. Probably our biggest victory was in Ohio this year when we supported a bill prohibiting transgender procedures on minors and men and women's sports, and got that passed, vetoed by the governor, and got a veto override. So that was a big victory, and we were right in the middle of that battle.
This is where, by the way, if viewers are not aware, Ohio, Indiana is a past state. We passed the resolution in 2016, so we're part of the 19 states that have already passed it. Just for everyone's information, but this F3 concept, this is where I think self-governance comes into play, as well as, of course, Convention of States supporting support as an organization. But so many of the issues at the state level, that's where we get involved. That's where we can get involved personally, as well as representing Convention of States. Paul, you spoke about the grassroots army. Convention of States is a large grassroots army, right? Grassroots organization.
Yep. And we have to keep them engaged and active. So
yes.
This F3 legislation is a great way to do it.
For those that may not be aware, if you're a new viewer tonight, we have just in Indiana alone, we have close to 70,000 supporters of Convention of States in Indiana. And I think nationally, are we still at right around 5.5 million? I think last numbers I saw. I don't know if we reached the 6 million mark as yet, but that's a large grassroots army. So
yes,
we should have some influence and some impact. And I know we have here in Indiana, we've addressed some legislation that falls right into this F3 concept. Well, Paul, tell us about another concept here. And am I correct that you were the originator of this concept?
I wouldn't say I was the originator of it. This type of legislation has been around since 2013. But I've been involved in facilitating this model legislation that we have. So what 34 Ready model legislation is we've developed model resolution in a bill to help states prepare for when we have the convention, hence the name 34 Ready. We want the states to be ready when we hit 34, and that they already have legislation in place that deals with selecting, instructing, overseeing commissioners to the convention. And a piece of it also provides criminal penalties for a commissioner who deviates from their instructions. So it's turned out to be a really powerful tool this year in the legislature. So far, 12 states have this kind of legislation active. Some of it's our model, some of it's not. Doesn't matter as long as the state is talking about it. And we see this as a great alternative in a state where we're having trouble getting traction on our application, because all the legislators here are all the objections. It's going to be a runaway and can't control it. Yeah. Everything's going to be terrible. So I'm starting getting an echo here.
Yeah.
Guys,
I don't know what am I echoing?
No. Okay, now it sounds good. So the way we think this legislation is really going to help us in those states where we're having trouble getting traction is the legislation allows the legislators to talk about all those things. How we can prevent a runaway. How can we make sure our commissioners aren't going to get rid of the Second Amendment, or how are we going to make sure they follow our instructions? How are we going to monitor them and decide if they are going out of bounds? And if we get this in place first in a state where we're struggling with our application, then we can move to passing our application. And when somebody says the objection, well, we don't even know how the commissioners are going to be selected, we can say, oh, no, we did that bill last year. Here's exactly what it says. I think that's a very important point. This can be done and addressed prior to passing the resolution. So absolutely. Now, Indiana already has some laws on the books related to this. Okay. But it's a bit different from our model legislation. And if the Indiana team would decide, they certainly could take this up and try to get, update the Indiana legislation in this area. Well, this is something that's being addressed here in Indiana by our team. Matter of fact, we were just discussing this a bit at our Surge Day last month. And
about getting certain legislators involved and possibly helping to address this. Can you tell everybody just how does Indiana stand as far as commissioners that that would participate in a convention?
The summary of the existing legislation?
Right.
So the existing legislation says that Indiana will send 2 commissioners and 2 alternates.
Right.
And it sets some parameters for, who can be a commissioner. They can't be a federal legislator employee, can't be a statewide employee, some things like that. It establishes a oversight committee that would be charged with watching the commissioners. So if the convention is going on when the Indiana legislature is out of session, they'll have this committee that's monitoring things. And if they see an issue, they can bring it back to the legislature. So those are some of the general things. And in Indiana, it is a felony for a commissioner to violate their instructions. So they could face some serious jail time and a fine.
Okay. All right. Well, I know our concern here in Indiana, of course, is with only 2 commissioners being designated to this. I mean, this is a convention could take months and months possibly to conduct. And so I think we need to have more commissioners, I think, is what the general feeling is.
Right. And our suggestion is an odd number as well.
And an odd number, right.
Probably 5 or 7 is an ideal number.
Right, right. But am I correct now? States are not limited as to how many commissioners they can send to this convention, right?
That's correct. They can send as many as they want, but it's still 1 state, 1 vote.
1 state, 1 vote. Okay. All right. All right. Well, Paul, I think that's about a wrap. I think I want to thank you for coming on and talking about this. Am I correct in saying that we got a good shot possibly of getting, 3 to 5 more states you think this year? Yeah.
Well, let's say Kansas, North Carolina, if we get into the Senate, maybe, a couple others, it could be pretty close.
I know many in the COS movement are anxious to get some more states on board here. We got to 19 and we've kind of we didn't have any additions last year, right?
Not that I'm aware.
Other than I guess potentially Kansas. But so we're thirsty to get more states on board here. So.
Yes, we are. Hey, can I mention one more thing, Dale?
Sure.
One very exciting bit of news out of Pennsylvania is we ran a poll in Pennsylvania. If I remember right, it was 800 sample size. So talking to 800 people. And we asked some of the normal questions, do you support term limits and limiting the federal government and so on. But we had a question in there that went kind of like this. Would you be willing to vote for a candidate of a different party who supports Convention of States that would stop the abuses of the federal government? So we were asking, would you vote across party lines for a COS supporting candidate? And 70% of the respondents said yes.
Is that right?
It was 69% for Republicans, 70% for Democrats, and 77% for independents.
Wow.
And this poll is giving us a lot of traction in an election year to work with some of those legislators who are fighting against us to show them what the voters think of their antics. And if they don't support Convention of States, they're willing to vote for their opponents, even if they're in a different party.
Even if a different party. That's very interesting. Very interesting. All right, Paul, we're out of time. And I want to thank you again for coming on and enlightening us. And maybe bring you on later on this year, see how we stand as far as the state of the states.
I'd be happy to do that. Thanks,
and
guys.
hopefully we can report more have joined us. So
yes.
All right, Paul. Thank you very much, Paul. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Paul.
All right, Ken. Good deal. Good deal. Well, Ken, let's any other comments or questions there that we missed, or
No, other than a big thank you to Paul for coming on and giving us all that information. So, just a great big thanks.
good, good. All right. Well, Kent, let's. I see Maringo Mike has got a little clip for us, and I know he's trying to pump us up and encourage us and get us going and keep our spirits up. So,
Yep. He ran
and
into technical difficulties with this one, but I think he made it through.
yeah. There's well. We'll let the viewers see what it is, but it's still, the message is still there, still good. So let's see what Maringo Mike's got to say for us here.
All right.
It's Maringo Mike here, and we're in the home stretch of the most important year in recent history. From LA to Chicago, and Atlanta's in there too, Illinois and even Denver taking on a New York view. Now it's not the time to quiver or find a place to hide. We've got work to do, together rise if the generations are gonna survive. It's time to do our duty and leave the results to Almighty God. We're in the flyover place with a country to save. Let's roll up our sleeves, let's get her done. Don't rely on the polls. We're in the home stretch now. Let's roll.
I'll tell you that Maringo Mike guy is really becoming quite the poet. I tell you.
Yeah, I think he took a little bit of a poetic course over the summer, and that kind of helped him with his delivery. So
Did he? Okay. Well, good. Always like hearing Maringo Mike. All right. Well, Ken, I think let's bring on our next guest. We're going to talk about. Well, let's bring on Gary Harbaugh here. And hello, Gary.
Greetings, gentlemen. How are you?
And just fine, just fine. Gary is. We're going to introduce tonight, as I said in the introduction to our broadcast this evening. We're gonna focus on the national debt, and I've asked Gary, since he is very, very knowledgeable of this topic. I've asked Gary to create a series for us, and he has done that, and it's called Debt Avalanche. I don't know where that title comes from. I'm not sure what the significance is. That maybe it has something to do with uncontrollable amounts. I don't know. But Gary is creating this series, and he's recording some episodes for us, and we're going to play the first one tonight. What's this one about tonight, Gary? Before we start it up,
I think we want to go back and take a historical perspective and see what the framers of our Constitution, some things they had to say about debt.
So it was a topic even at that point, right? In framing the Constitution.
It's been a topic for governments for 1,000 years. Spending, and how do you spend the money, and how much can you spend? It's a big deal for governments.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And there have been some nightmare stories about governments that have overspent. Am I right?
Most definitely. Yep.
Some good examples. So you would think, wouldn't you, that since there are examples of countries that have overspent and what happened to them, that surely we would take note of the lessons there and not let that happen here in this country, right?
the lessons of history are remote, and the demands of the next election and I'd say the incentive of the next election and the demands of the donating class who fund the election of public officials is very urgent. And so what's happened in the remote past is kind of irrelevant to them if you really want to know the truth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I jest there. It seems like we haven't learned the lessons that have been are available to us. So let's take a look at this clip that you have, this founders and their viewpoint of debt, and then we'll come back and sum it up here. So here we go.
Hi, it's Gary. Another in our series on national debt and spending. Tonight I want to focus a little bit upon what did the founding fathers say about debt. George Washington said to contract new debts is not the way to pay old ones. America began with some debt from the American Revolution, and these Revolutionary War debts, George Washington thought they should be paid off. They shouldn't simply be rolled over by borrowing more money to pay off the old creditors. Other founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, was a guy who actually wrote in one of the Federalist Papers. He was not as concerned about national debt, and yet he had this to say: nothing can more affect national prosperity than a constant and systematic attention to extinguish the present debt and to avoid as much as possible the incurring of any new debt. So even Alexander Hamilton had concerns about national debt. Thomas Jefferson, third president, and Franklin were other founding fathers who expressed concerns about debt. The guy I want to look at, though, in a little more detail is James Madison, the fourth president, and the man who was the principal architect of the actual language in our Constitution. It's called the father of the Constitution. And he was concerned particularly about debt as it was related to war. America, as you know, has been involved in wars for about 20, 25 years. We're paying for one now. We're incurring untold trillions in debt for this purpose. Madison said, of all the enemies of public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it comprises and develops the germs of every other. War is the parent of armies. From these proceed debts and taxes. And armies, debts, and taxes are the known instruments for the bringing the many under the domination of the few. The many is really a reference to we, the people, the taxpayers, and the few are the people who are the creditors of these debts. In some sense, today, many of those creditors are foreign nations and foreign governments. So we are putting ourselves at risk in being in debt to foreign nations and foreign creditors. Foolish government spending always benefits the politically well-connected. For example, a few years ago, $600 million was allocated to building solar panels. All those panels turned out to be useless. They ended up being put in a landfill. But someone certainly benefited, and it was not we the people. This is true of a great deal of government spending. It really benefits a few people who are politically well connected, know how to manipulate the government for their own benefit, but it does nothing for we the people who are the taxpayers and the backbone of our country. It is immoral for a generation like my generation to incur huge debts and pass those debts on to our children and grandchildren, who they are the ones that are going to have to pay the taxes and suffer the pain and burden of these debts that we are passing on to them. This is fundamentally immoral. And this is the reason that this generation, needs to bring about a convention of the states in order to put limits on federal spending. You can't limit debt. You can't correct debt unless you first correct spending. And that's what we can do with the convention of states.
Interesting. I think Dale's unmuted now. Gary,
Yeah.
we have a viewer question, which I think I'll go ahead and bring up now because it's got, I guess it has a number of different takes that you can have on it or different equations. But here's the question from one of our viewers. He wants to know, if a balanced budget amendment was passed tomorrow, how long would it take for us to eliminate our national debt?
Nobody can really answer that accurately. Um, it depends partly on things like how quickly the economy grows and really how determined Congress is and the president to paying it off. It would probably take, it might take 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's hard to say. I don't honestly believe the government debt will ever be 100% eliminated. What we really have to do is get the trajectory of it going down rather than up. And it's at a level now that's um, associated with really dampening the opportunity for economic growth of our economy in the current time. So having excess amount of debt slows down the ability of our economy to grow, and it has all kinds of harmful effects. And it also, we're getting to this level where you kind of get this snowball effect that the interest expense is so large that it becomes nearly impossible to cut spending enough to really reduce the debt. And that's one of the big threats that we face, is that the interest expense will overwhelm our ability to really cut spending enough to begin reducing that debt.
I haven't seen this in a long time, but there is a financial theory that some debt is good. I mean, that actually a healthy, and this is also pertains to business as well, but that it would be a healthy economy, that if we did maintain some level of debt, obviously much lower than what we are right now. But I think you're right, Gary. I don't think we will ever completely eliminate the national debt, but get it back. The trajectory has to be changed, and you have to get this back down to the level where it's considered healthy, I guess, is what the best. And I don't anymore. I don't know what that level is. I don't know.
Generally looked at as like a percentage of your gross domestic product. So we're approaching 200%, and that's just in the stated amount of debt. Back during the spending of World War II, it got over 100%, and people thought that was terrible. And there was a concerted effort over a number of years to get that debt back down as a percentage of our GDP. And that's the direction we want to go, is get it down. But it's becoming increasingly more challenging. And in this series, we're going to talk about some historical things, why we can borrow and spend recklessly, why does it happen, and what can we do about it, and why isn't it corrected? There's a lot of things. I appreciate the fact that somebody did ask a question, and I encourage people, every week, if you have questions, pass those on to Dale and Ken, and they'll relay them to me, because if there's something specific that I'm not clarifying and you would like clarification on, or like me to try to give a better explanation, I'd be happy to work on that.
Yeah, let me throw up our email address. If anyone's got any comments or questions or anything that Gary's referring to there, send us an email to raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com, and we'll certainly address it. But I think, Gary, it doesn't make any difference what administration's in charge. The debt seems to continue to rise, and why it's not the number one priority in this country. I don't understand. I don't understand that. Obviously, we have a lot of priorities in this country right now, but this ought to be one of the most talked about priorities, and continuously, not just at budget time, but continuously, it seems to me. So
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a huge problem, and it's not talked about. And but hopefully, we'll bring more attention to this, and people will become aware and realize that the best way to address this spending problem is through a convention of states.
yeah.
And that's why we're talking about it. That's why we think it's very, very important, because it has the potential to really wreck our economy and our standard of living, really.
And Gary has already recorded some of the clips, some of the episodes in this series, but he talks about the national currency, some possible currencies from other countries that could take over. I mean, if we lose in the United States, if we lose the United States as the national currency, that or the global currency, we could really be could really have an effect on us, right, Gary? I mean,
It would tend to create a huge amount of inflation in this country.
yeah,
And I'm talking things that we have never seen in our history.
yeah,
And inflation is terribly destructive, particularly to people, in the lower economic scale, and anybody from, that's middle class now on down. Man, you're talking about potentially devastating effects. And even people that are very wealthy, depending on where their wealth is, it may just evaporate if it's in, financial markets or something that happens to get, seriously hurt by the inflation.
yeah,
Gary, I mean, obviously, I totally agree with the fact that we have to almost at this point take it into our own hands with convention of states. But I always wondered. I mean, I think it was Senator Rand Paul. I wonder why. I think he came up and mentioned the penny tax, and there's been a few things like that have been recommended. And it seems like such a simple start. I often wonder why our government can't at least make one step forward with something like that, to at least recognize that it's a problem and make a small step towards getting it started. Again, I know one or two legislators have brought it up, and I know there's other recommendations other than the penny tax. But how do you feel about something like the penny tax? Is that something you can speak?
Yeah, I mean, very interesting. I think that was there was a pretty good move in Congress to initiate something like that back in the year, 2001.
yeah. That's been
And
some years
then
ago.
9/11 happened, and that just went out the window.
Yeah,
And since then, we've had, the great financial crisis, the COVID pandemic, and there's always seems to be an excuse to not do something about it right now. And I talked about, the spending. It's always kick the can down the road. It's always, well, boy, we're going to kick the can down the road because we're going to deal with that, next year or the year after. But that never happens. And the reason, and one of the basic reasons, is there's not a real limit on the ability to spend money. And when there is not an actual limit, then Congress just has no will to really cut spending in a meaningful way.
Well, this is an election year, so we're going to talk about this, and let's hope perhaps the candidates running this time around will speak to it. So we're not gonna hold our breath on it, but
No, don't.
all right, Gary, thank you very much. I might mention Gary will come on and do a soapbox once in a while, very short rant, especially on this continuing resolution and the things that are happening with it. So we'll see Gary from time to time on the soapbox, in addition to the Dead Ambulance series. So, Gary, thank you very much for doing this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dale.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I tell you, that's a topic that it just doesn't get the attention that it needs to get.
And I think at this point, I think it's pretty evident. It's to me, it's an addiction. It's an addiction by our government. They've been addicted to printing. They've been addicted to spending, and it's not coming out of their pocket. So who cares?
Yeah.
That's the attitude.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about Ken. What's coming up here next Monday? We're going to have a lady on. Her name's Kathy Humbarger. Now, she's better known, I guess, I think, more so in my area of the state here in Indiana. But Kathy was a very big player in the Right to Life movement, especially in our area, and I think statewide. And we also know that she is now she's retired from that organization, and she's now involved in the Safe Haven Baby Box group that we featured on COS Indiana Live some weeks ago. So I'm going to have her on and talk about what she's been up to. So both in the Right to Life movement as well as with the Safe Haven Baby Box. So it should be very interesting, I would think. Now, we've also just learned today that the topic has been determined for our next roundtable coming up on March 25th, the fourth Monday of every month, and the topic's going to be artificial intelligence. I don't think there's very much to talk about there, is there? Ken?
I don't know. I'll have to ask AI and see what they think.
Yeah, ask.
I'll have to ask ChatGPT and see what they're thinking about that.
I'll tell you, this is it's growing. It's growing, and the use of it is I'm seeing it being used more and more.
Well, I think it's certainly a tool that can be beneficial, but it's like anything else, Dale. If it's not controlled and at least monitored in a way that keeps some of the things that where it could get out of control, like our government, there are some things that obviously could be of concern. But I think it has to be looked at closely, and certainly we need to be smart about it.
Yep.
Smarter than the computer at this point.
All right. So that's coming up March 25th. So look forward to that, folks. One more shot here. Our email, raiseyourvoice.cos@gmail.com. If you have any comments or questions after we go off the air tonight, raiseyourvoice.cos@gmail.com. I might want to mention that coming up, we do have another podcast episode number 11 in our COS Indiana Live Voices series, where we interviewed Larry Hudson, one of our region captains, and his career and experience in Convention of States. So you might want to look that up. That's available on Spotify.com. And it's episode number 11, Larry Hudson, COS Indiana Live Voices. So we're already working on the next episode. So be on the lookout for episode number 12. Well, Ken, I think that's a wrap for us tonight. We'll close out with our favorite Mark Meckler video, I'll Never Stop Fighting. Very good video. But until then, so Ken, thanks for everything tonight, and appreciate it. So we'll be looking forward, everyone, to seeing you again next Monday evening at either on our Facebook page, Convention of States Indiana, or our YouTube channel, Indiana Patriots for Convention of States, 7 p.m. Eastern Time next Monday evening. So good night, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night, Dale.
I struggle to empathize with people who would give up. It doesn't make sense to me. Sam Adams said, for those of you who prefer safety and security over liberty, over the animating fight for liberty, I hope that you Enjoy licking the hands that feed you. May your chains rest lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen. Like, do you understand that your kids and you are sentencing your kids and your grandkids and your friends' kids and your neighbors' kids to a lifetime of slavery and servitude, literally, of fear, of living in the darkness, but never, ever, never, never, never give up. George Washington lost the majority of his battles that he fought in the American Revolution. If you read his writings, if you read the letters where he was writing to Congress asking for money and troops, he was saying, we're losing. I don't have the troops I need. I don't have the supplies I need. Did he quit? What about the guys on the beach at Normandy? Like, what did they do? Did they just quit? Oh, there's, a lot of guys are dying around me. It's really bad. It looks really dismal. Those cliffs are huge. Machine gun fire raining down on us. And it's too hard. We should just quit. Thank God those people didn't quit. If they had, where would we be? I get discouraged for sure. And I will quit fighting at some point. And that point is when the first shovel of dirt hits the top of my box 6 feet down.